Sophia, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for having me.
And before we get started with your pregnancy story, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia. I live in London. I am married to Cookie, that's his nickname, and I have two children and a dog called Sausage.
That's funny. Will you start with your story about getting pregnant? I think we need to start even for your first child.
Yeah, we need to go way, way back. So I had met my husband, who's actually my second husband, and I met him probably when I was about 38 years old, and it was a real whirlwind romance. And so we met on the Friday, we confessed our love on the Saturday, and we were engaged and we were married exactly a year later, which was actually today, 5 years ago today. And we both wanted to have children, and we were actively trying to get pregnant. And it was one of those things where we just thought it was going to happen straight away. So after a few months, it didn't happen. So I went to the doctors and I said, look, it's not really happening for me. And here in the UK, depending on which borough that you live in and your age, you are entitled to one round of IVF. I don't know if that's still present now. I'd spoken to my GP and he had basically said, I'm not entirely sure because of your age. However, we need to start the process because you're 30, 38 years old. And so I had the conversation with him, and then I never heard anything back from him. But then a couple of months later down the line, I went back to the doctors and said, oh, Dr. X had said that we can start the process. And they said, sorry, Dr. X is no longer at the surgery. And because it's done on a cycle basis, I was like, I'm now lost. But I had to start the conversations again. And the next appointment wasn't until a couple of months. And I was in a job that was somewhat toxic and I was under a lot of stress. So I left with no job to go to, and we just said we would manage. And I got a dog because why not? Why not get a dog? And then we brought Sausage home in August, and in September I found out I was pregnant with my son. We'd waited so long to get pregnant and finally found out I was pregnant. And then on my first appointment to our midwife, she made it very clear that she almost was preparing me for the worst. So I'd gone to the doctors, I'd skipped and saying, oh my goodness, I'm pregnant, I can't believe it. They were like, okay, because of your age, you may not go full term. There was a stat that she gave me because of my ethnicity, being Black, that there could be complications. And also the fact that I was overweight in their eyes with BMI, and we all know that's ridiculous. Because of all these factors. So every midwife appointment that I went to, I was reminded that I was overweight. I was reminded that I was an older mum, a geriatric mum, of which they said to me the once, but they said in such a jovial word, surely you're not a geriatric, but in medical terms. So there was no real positive interaction. So I was pregnant and I was going there, and every time I spoke to somebody, they told me about all the things that could go wrong. I know all the things that could have gone wrong because I'd already Googled them. It didn't feel like a positive thing, and I didn't tell anybody I was pregnant until I was about 20 weeks. Not my family knew, but I wasn't like announcing it massively on any social media platforms. And I think I announced it on my birthday because I knew that I was going to be seeing other friends outside my wider circle. It was a really tricky experience because I was very nervous, and I've always been quite a nervous individual, and I was anxious. And I had a midwife that didn't feel like she had my interests at heart. And she would often speak to me in a way that I found quite patronizing. And I know with all social pressures and jobs and what have you, so I had quite an open mind. But I think the final nail for me with this particular midwife is that she was traveling to Australia. And to go to Australia, you need to apply for visas. And typically these can take a month. And so she told me at 27 weeks that she was going away to Australia. And she was going away the next week.
And who was going to take her place?
Somebody else that I hadn't met.
You hadn't even worked with.
Hadn't even worked with. I wasn't aware of it. She told me, oh, I'm going to Australia. Oh, I'm going to Manchester or Birmingham. I'm going up the road. you were going to Australia for a month or 2 months and you failed to tell me your client. And that really made me feel very like unseen. And I should add, Jamie, I don't have my mum. I don't have my parents. Both my parents passed away. So I'm the youngest of four at the age of 38. So all my siblings are older, they've all got kids. I live in London. They live on the outskirts of London. So there wasn't anybody to really speak to or to get comfort from. And because my friends all had children when I was out partying, they've all now got children that are older. So having those it's not relatable. I'm like, oh, I'm 7 months pregnant. They're like, I've got a teenager. So there was no real support. And I found that quite isolating.
Yeah.
As soon as I found out we were pregnant, we had to go look for a house because we were living in my 2-bedroom flat. We were looking around and I found a lovely house. It was a lovely house in an all right area. But what I loved about it was that the fact that it was all done up. Like we could just move in, unpack, and that would be that. And I remember on my birthday, my husband was like, I've just got one more place that I'd like to see. Should we go and see it? I went because I knew that we couldn't afford it. So I was like, yeah, let's go. I don't mind because we're not going to be able to get it. And the house was in like dire need of repair. It hadn't been touched in years. And I could see his little face light up. And he would say, oh, imagine if we put if we put our child in this bedroom. And I was just like, we're not going to get it because we can't afford it. And it needs extensive work. It needs a full renovation, like new electrics, new boiler, new plumbing. I was like, no, I don't want to go anywhere near it because I'm 6 or 7 months pregnant and we wouldn't be able to get it done in time. So, of course, we ended up renegotiating and getting the house. My son was born in the middle of May and we completed at the end of May. And we got the keys, we moved in, and I had an emergency C-section. And we had to move out of my flat. I'd sold my flat. It was such a quick turnaround. My flat was on the market for ages, and just by a miracle chance, it completed. I had my son, and then we had to move in. And we moved into a house that was, I remember crying. I remember crying a lot because it was just a mess, an absolute mess.
Yeah. Similar to what's going on in the background.
No, this was like there was still when we moved in, the kettle was still warm, and the previous owners had left like fish in the fridge. There was still food in the cupboards. We found the person who it's his children sold the house. And so there was lots of like old belongings here. There was no clear space of anywhere. And I just had a newborn. I was unable to breastfeed because I had a breast reduction when I was 22, 22 or 23. And even though my milk was coming in, there was no way of it getting out regularly, consistently. So I was feeling I was feeling quite alone.
Yeah.
And then my husband had his paternity leave, but he had to put his paternity leave in with us moving. So we had a week of him here. And then I said to myself that in order to get this house straight, we're going to have to strip it back. So I decided to start the renovation process with a 2-month-old baby.
Wow, what a challenge.
Yeah.
And your C-section and that recovery also in the same time.
Yeah, I think as well with the way that certainly here, in fact, in general, talking about a C-section, it's major abdominal surgery. I know people that have had gallbladders removed and they're like, don't move, you stay in bed or whatever, light work. I had the C-section and I was having to help move, like my family came up and on board, but it's the stress of moving around and the stress of a baby. And because it was an emergency C-section, it's not what I was expecting. I didn't really know, even though I went to some of the classes that the doctors had put on, I was expecting to go in, have contractions, dilate to 10 centimeters, and baby's gonna come. Hey.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like that at all. And it was very intense.
Yeah.
Very intense. But then anyway, so we're in this house, we're doing the renovation. I have my son, and I decided that why not try and put even more pressure on us, that we would enter ourselves for a TV show. And of course, the TV show said, we want to record the process of you doing this house. So I had this bassinet basket, Moses basket. It was made of like rubber by an English company here. And I just basically stayed at my friend's house for 2 weeks, then stayed at my cousin's house whilst walls were coming down. And then we spent, once they cut the water off, we spent 9 or 10 weeks in a hotel with our dog, with our newborn son.
That's incredible.
I didn't anticipate the feelings because I didn't have anybody to talk to. So I knew that I would look occasionally online. I use social media very differently to how I was using it back then. And I didn't really know who to talk to. All I knew that I had a baby and my milk had come in, it wasn't coming out. And I also had to try and project manage this renovation. And my job was to try and make sure that all this money flying out the door was, we could afford to do it. And it felt very consuming, very consuming, because I couldn't speak to anybody. And my sister was there and what have you, but they lived outside London. So I then started to go online to try and see if there were other women that of my age, because like I said, when my friends were having children, I was still out partying or getting the career. There wasn't anybody out there that was relatable.
Yeah.
So whilst at the hotel, I thought that my stress levels, and I thought because I just had a baby, I was unaware of the postpartum period as well. I didn't really know what, I'd heard it, but I didn't really understand what it was about, because why would I?
Yeah.
I felt unwell and I was having dizzy spells, and I did a pregnancy test and I was pregnant again, and with my daughter. And the thing is that I find remarkable about this, certainly for your listeners, is that right at the beginning of trying to get pregnant, I was met, as I said, with so much negativity. And I was told that IVF would probably be an option, the option I'd have to go down. And I was always met with it being, I'm not sure it's going to happen. You are old, you're too overweight. And I fell pregnant again. And I know that it's not as straightforward. Like, it's not as falling pregnant when I was a kid, you kissed the boy, it's like, you're going to get pregnant. I'm like, oh. But to be met with like no real evidence, they just looked at me, no, not the full pregnant, I fell pregnant again. But with my daughter, I was actually bleeding at the beginning of the pregnancy, but they would not give me any examination because they said that examination could harm the pregnancy. And so I had to wait, I think about another 4 or 5 weeks until they could have the pregnancy whilst living in a hotel. Yeah, the whole thing was just a big blur.
Yeah. How far along were you when you were bleeding? It was early.
So let me do the maths. September. I was probably 2 months pregnant, but because I fell pregnant, because I had a C-section with my son and I fell pregnant quite quickly, again, the conversations that I were having was like, we don't want to do, because it wouldn't have been an ultrasound, it would have been a probe, internal examination. And they said that we don't want to do that because the cervix appears to be closed, but there's like some kind of swelling or what have you. I was just in fear mode, so I wasn't really hearing what they were saying.
Right.
Because I was being met with that look saying it's probably, and you've got to understand that it almost felt like they had, for me, I was pregnant. It doesn't matter what stage. They say you shouldn't tell anybody until after 14 weeks because something could happen. Anything can happen at any time.
Yeah.
And for me, I was really wanting, even though it was a surprise and my daughter wasn't planned, I was really wanting someone to say, this is going to be okay. Yeah. Bad things can happen, but this is going to be okay. So I already had one pregnancy where it was all my midwife wasn't on board, she wasn't listening to me. And then I found out I was pregnant again. And the first couple of months, they were just like, it's not really, you know, we don't really know, but it may happen or it might not happen. But yeah, we're going to send you home. I was like, so yeah, it was tricky because I didn't know about the 4th trimester, and 5th and 6th month, I was then pregnant.
Yeah. I do have a question about your breast reduction. So yes. I guess your breasts were pretty enlarged. And
yeah.
How did you resolve that? It sounds really painful.
They were like bazookas. They were just like, my husband was like, what is going on? They were just, I couldn't put my arms down. And because again, this technique may have changed, but I think it's still very much in practice. It's called here in the UK anchor scarring, anchor technique. So they cut around the nipple and down the breasts, and then like a shape of an anchor, so underneath the breast, and they move the nipple up. But they don't take it all off. So they're basically cutting away from the mammary gland. So even though this was 22 years ago, and they'd said to me that sometimes that connection is not made, so your milk won't come in. And it kept coming in. It was just, they were so heavy and I was so engorged under my arms that I tried to use a supplementer because I wanted to try and breastfeed. I didn't realize that until I was actually trying to do it. But I was told that I just have to wait for my body to reabsorb it because I wasn't getting anything out. I got off some colostrum when babies were born. But yeah, I just had to wait. And that, I think the first time was about a week of just being in utter agony. And then my daughter was probably a bit longer. And yeah, I should also add that I had my daughter in 2020. So it was the height of the pandemic. So trying to reach out to doctors with like engorged breasts, yeah, there wasn't really that much support at the end of the phone.
Yeah, I can imagine. Let's go back to you being pregnant at 2 months postpartum. When did you get in with the doctor to confirm that pregnancy?
Yeah, so I think my first appointment, I think it was probably in January, whereby I had, or my scan was in January, because it fell in line with my son previous year. And it was certainly before my birthday, because because I'm older, I was told every appointment, there was always a risk. There was always a risk. I was told that I would need to have a C-section. And they wanted to somehow, they can only examine externally. They couldn't obviously see the stitch lines inside, that there was a risk of that coming undone. That's not the terminology that they may have used, because I hadn't left it a year. I had an ultrasound, and then I had to go and see the obstetrician for him to inspect my C-section.
Wow. And how did the pregnancy go?
My daughter, yeah, so it was okay. It was okay because so February there was talk across the world about something happening in China, and me being my anxious self was like, okay, it's there, it's not here. We went into lockdown, I think the 13th of March. I'm not entirely sure, but by of which my husband worked in central London. No one knew what it was. So I was like, you can't get to work. And no one could come back to the house. I didn't want to go out anywhere because here they'd said that pregnant women, there was no fear. We mustn't worry. We should go about our business as long as we're doing all the things and taking the correct vitamins. There's going to be no effect of that. And then very quickly that message changed. I was already quite an anxious woman, pregnant, and then hearing the news of a pandemic. And then there we were told, we were called and said, right, your baby's due in May. Your husband's not going to be able to come with you. And that just sent me into a bit of a spiral, like quite panicked, because I knew that I really needed him there.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did your appointments go? You could still go to them?
Yeah, you could. You could, but I will give my hospital, my borough where I live, their credit. Because of my age, they were like, well, you need to have this extra scans. And I think typically you have 2-3 scans, but I would have 4 or 5. I think in total I've had 4 or 5 scans. They insisted that I come to those appointments, but it was very much come in, have a scan. If there's any questions or any queries, then here's a number. But you have to appreciate this is now a pandemic and we've got less doctors. More doctors are on like front line essentially. You may not get to speak to the same person. Make sure that you've got copies of your notes because we won't be able to check them. So if you weren't asking the questions there and then when you were doing a face-to-face with when the scan was taking place, or you had to request, that was it, you had to request to see somebody when you were having your scan. Now, if you didn't request somebody, there's just the person, not the videographer, but the person that's doing it, that is just there to check the activity, the baby's activity, and not answering questions. So I spent a lot of time on hold. I spent a lot of time people saying to me that it's going to be absolutely fine, but that was more of a generic message. Yeah, it was quite challenging.
And how did you feel during that time?
I was nervous because no one knew what was going on in the world.
Yeah.
But because my experience from my first pregnancy, which I didn't mention, so the midwife had told me, I think, I can't remember the weeks, but you need to start monitoring baby's movements. And if you feel that, making an actual note of the time, if you feel as though baby hasn't moved around the right time, then, you know, you need to come in and see us. And what she didn't convey, or what she didn't clarify, was that sometimes baby just might be sleeping. So if baby moved at 11 o'clock and he didn't move at 11 o'clock the next day, he may move at 12 o'clock. Like, it's just thereabouts. It's not going to be the same thing. So I became very, I think obsessed is probably the lighter word. I would write down all the times. And then the next day, if baby didn't move, I was really anxious. I was like, something's happening. And that's where I can say that she wasn't giving me the correct duty of care, because I was already an anxious woman. Those feelings almost came over to my second pregnancy. So I was already anxious about the pregnancy, and I was very anxious about a virus that was like coming across the world and not knowing, and we couldn't go anywhere anyway. But I was really worried. Like, I'd spend a lot of time worrying and like regretful. Like, hindsight's an amazing thing, isn't it? Like, we all know now, but it was quite a scary time.
Wow. What about exercise and diet? Was that changed, or did you continue it with your routine?
With my son, I continued. I didn't run so much. I walked a lot of incline. I've always been quite active. So I was lifting, doing weights with my son up until about 6 or 7 months. I would get up and I'd make sure that I'd walk to the gym and I had regular movement, but that coincided with us moving. Then we moved, had baby, then moved, and tried to get out, but at the same time my body felt different. And having this, I don't think that we're told enough about C-sections. Again, like, it's major surgery. And then falling pregnant very quickly afterwards, my body was like that overstretched elastic band. And then I was pregnant again. I still don't think it has recovered. I don't know what that condition is whereby your abdomen, it's like kind of the muscles. Yeah, I feel that's happened. But with my daughter, I didn't do as much exercise because of the pandemic. I was just, even walking out in the park, I didn't want to come anywhere near anybody because I was very nervous.
Did you find out the gender during pregnancy?
Yes.
Oh, tell us about that.
Yeah, it was all a big surprise. So I was not really, it was very much like, we're having a baby, but my husband's doing, should we find out? And I was like, yeah, we might as well. With my first marriage, I never thought I'd have children. And then when I met Cookie and we didn't think we would be able to have children, was quite, I maybe came round to that idea that it wasn't going to happen. So when I did start thinking whether I was going to have children, I thought I'd have girls. And to find out it was a boy was a bit of a shock, because I'm one of 4 and I have 2 brothers and a sister. So yeah, Cookie was over the moon.
Yeah. Was there any products that you couldn't live without, or you would recommend that helped you with pregnancy?
I would say it's called bio oil here, but like any kind of like oil, like obviously to like oil stomach, but not only that, but just to making sure my skin was hydrated, because I'm very dry indeed. So yeah, so anything kind of cream, I tried to make more of an effort. And when I was doing that, it was almost like a calming element. So I tried to take out time where I wasn't stressing about the baby, I wasn't stressing about the pandemic, or I wasn't stressing about the previous midwife or whatever. It was almost like a ritual whereby I would try and dedicate just a bit of time to myself and honor my body, essentially.
I love that. And how did you prepare for birth and the baby?
I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew that there was, because I was nervous, someone had recommended hypnobirthing. But I thought it was like you would pick up a book and learn it in a day and move on. I left it to the last minute. But I'm really into music. So I started finding playlists or music that could essentially calm me. I kind of power read through this hypnobirthing book and did things and made up my own way. But yeah, music helped. I tried to think about what I may need because we were obviously starting to pack up when I was going to have my son. So I was like having to like, okay, so that's my bag. I might need that, or something like marking boxes to know where these things that might be. But it was a very confusing time. And I used to be organized, but I certainly wasn't then.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Did you take any classes or just the hypno birthing?
Yes, they offer through the NHS, they offer when you find out you're pregnant, there are these antenatal classes. There's like couples in a room and there's a dummy or something, and it's very, I hate to use the word again, generic. But my husband is quite a quiet individual. So things like this could be quite overwhelming for him. Like all these people in the room and hi, my name's Steve, hi, my name's Sally. So we did a couple of those, but he's like, oh God, it was so hot in there, I don't really want to go again. So it was I winged it. But even though I winged it, it wasn't when I got to the hospital, because my son was due on the 17th, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd said that I didn't want a sweep. And I ended up having 3 sweeps because I was just like wanting it to happen. But then I said to the doctors, if I haven't dilated, then he's not ready. He's not ready to come. I think the dates aren't right. And I'm not really up to speed on dates. I was never really up to speed on like when I'm ovulating and stuff like that. I should know my body, but I just didn't. And I just felt that he wasn't ready to come. So they gave me I can't remember what it's called now. An induction. They gave me an induction and nothing happened. It was very uncomfortable. And then they gave me another one, but then my waters broke on the Sunday. And it wasn't a lot, but they were like, we're gonna have to take you down. And this was in the evening. We're gonna have to prepare you. So we went downstairs and they hooked me up for a epidural. And then there was like a pager alert, and they were like, oh my God, it's an emergency. And there was an actual emergency. A woman next door who was going into labor was having complications. So the anaesthetist that was like looking after me and everybody, this was with my son, they all rushed to surgery and then everything was fine. She was fine like an hour later, and my waters had broken the day before. And so they came back and they were like, oh, I was like, I can feel my feet, I can feel my legs. And they were like, well, we're going to have to give it to you again. But they put a line, I think the line was somewhere around here, but they taped it to my neck and they taped a plastic note on it. So anybody to come up to give me a certain amount or something. But then there was another emergency and I was all ready to go down again. And they left me in my room. And by which point I was losing my will at this point. And they came back and I said, I'm really concerned now because I think my baby's actually sitting in a puddle. There's no water left. And the other nurse had mentioned that potentially there could be infection and I need to have antibiotics. There's all these like words and things flying around my head. And my husband's like, you need to, don't worry, don't panic, don't panic. I was like, I'm now the emergency because my waters broke nearly 11 hours ago. So what are we doing? And yeah, that was pretty awful because the induction that I had, it obviously speeds up the contraction. So you're just sitting there, oh, this is fine, don't worry about it. And then it's just excruciating.
Yeah.
The midwife that was in there was not the friendliest.
Oh no.
She wasn't the friendliest. And my husband was trying to calm me down, but I was not very happy. Yeah, because it was, I guess they see thousands and thousands of women, but every woman is different. And that lower back pain, I was told to calm down. there's no need to be so vocal. And I think one of the comments from a midwife was, she almost implied to say, you got yourself here. And I was
Uh,
just, you had the sex. And I was so mad. And I remember looking at my husband, just calm down. I was just like, that's not what you want to hear.
yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I actually wanted to make a complaint. And so when you're going through pregnancies with the NHS with your doctor, you have a file. And so when you're admitted or when you have the baby, you hand over your file notes and they keep them on record for many years. But you have a right to request those files. In my head, I was like, so this person, I was making notes of all the conversation, all the things that I felt were not satisfactory and whereby I felt like I was feeling neglected. But I just didn't want to revisit it after I had my baby. I just wanted to move on, and we'd moved into a new house. So it
Yeah.
was what I wanted to do.
So, and that was your birth for your son.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for your daughter, you were probably scheduled for a C-section. When
Yes.
was that?
Yes. So it was also scheduled in May. So both my children are born on the same day, but 1 year apart.
I love that. Like birthdays, condense them down to one day.
One day, one cake. I'm really bad at remembering dates. So yeah, it's funny because what happened was, so because of the pandemic, and even though I had my appointments with my obstetrician, they made it very clear that because of what was going on, lots of members of staff were sick or they were shielding or what have you, that I may not see the same person again. So she was due on the Sunday, but they don't do surgery on a Sunday. And so they said, we've got 2 dates left. We've got the Monday or the Wednesday. And I was like, oh, let's do the Wednesday because that's my son's birthday. Imagine. And then as I left, I got home and I was speaking to my husband on the same day. I said, oh yeah, that's not the right thing to do. So I called up and the receptionist, or not receptionist, or the person that books it, turned around and said, I don't know if you've noticed, but we are like, there's a virus in the air and we can't keep changing our minds. So this is the day that your daughter's going to be born on. Yeah, so it was weird already that my daughter was going to be due 3 days before my son, a year to his birthday. And yeah, so it was lovely. It is lovely, but it was a real juggle.
And how far along were you when you had your C-section?
Yeah, so I had her at 39 and 3. The reason why is because of my age. Again, that's all they ever kept reminding me of. They made it very clear in quite an intense appointment whereby they said, because of my age, because of the previous C-section and not allowing myself a year to fall pregnant, they were concerned that the placenta was going to break away. So they said that we wanted to deliver baby early. In fact, there was talk of maybe having her earlier in the conversation, but the obstetrician said he was happy with where I was, so that he said he'd do it like 4 days, 5 days beforehand.
And take us back to that day. How did it get started?
With my daughter, we had a set time. And it was 7 o'clock in the morning. And we live a short distance away from the hospital. And it was a very hot day. And we were all told that we needed to make sure we had our masks on, be prepared to not be together. So my husband couldn't wait they told me that he couldn't wait with me and that he could only come into theatre when it was my time. So we were booked for 7 or 7:30. We had to get there for 7. I was booked for like maybe 8:10, a really like odd time. And again, there's been an emergency. And also there was a backlog of mums to be. And we got there and I didn't go into theatre until 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh my gosh.
So
That's
by
a
which
long
time,
wait.
it's a really long wait. And because we live so close, we live close to the hospital. My husband was like, I'm going to go back home because it was our son's birthday. And we had this system in the UK was that you could have a bubble. So if you like had an emergency, you could call on somebody. And my friend, very good friend around the corner, she lived on her own. So she was able to join our bubble because she was looking after my son. on his birthday whilst we were having my daughter. And so he said to the doctors, he was like, look, I'm going to go back home. And they said, if you go back home, our schedule may change and you may miss it. So you need to stay outside. And it was one of the hottest days in the UK during the pandemic. And he was out like baking in the sun. There's no reception, there's no warning, or he was just like on the grass. So when he came in, he was like bright red.
Yeah.
So we waited outside theatre for 10 minutes and then they brought us in, and I was in theatre for about an hour. And I think because of the first time, because it was an emergency, there's lots of happened really quickly. I was told the actual baby coming out is only like 15 minutes, but everything else takes up to about an hour. And my daughter, she has a hemangioma. And so when baby was taken out, which is for anybody listening, it's a birthmark, a visible birthmark. But at the time, we didn't know that it was a birthmark. They used forceps. So when baby's out and I'm lying down, I can hear my husband saying, "What's that on her face?" And they were talking at my head, but to the side. So I'm lying there, I can't feel the bottom half of my body. And everybody's, "Oh, is that the tongs?" Not the tongs,
Forceps?
Forceps, yeah. Is it the forceps? Oh no, it's just a bit of bruising. Oh no. So there was that like delay, and I was like lying down saying, "Can I just see my baby?" And the epidural, I actually had a reaction to it. So I was scratching. So my blood pressure was going down. I was feeling like really nauseous, which is apparently quite common, but also I was like really irritable and itchy. And there's a picture of my husband bringing my daughter to me, but I don't look like myself. I don't feel myself, I don't look myself. And then he was allowed to come into recovery for us for 20 minutes, and then he had to leave. And then I went straight up to the ward, which was like, again, really daunting because you were told that there's something going on outside. Was the hospital the best place to be? And I wanted to get out of the hospital as quickly as possible and come home.
What were you thinking when you're going through surgery and seeing her?
When I was going to surgery, what was I thinking?
Whenever you saw her.
Yeah, it was obviously amazing, really amazing. You have somebody that's there, comes down the ward, and they're asking all these questions. And again, were they masked up? Yeah, people were wearing masks. So you've got the doctors and nurses or whatever coming around, doing that. People are masked up. They've got their procedures of so many people in the ward at certain times. There's these little arrows on the floor, the direction that you can go to the bathroom. So all of which was new to everybody, as well as having a new baby. And they asked me how I was going to feed baby. And I was like, I'm going to try and breastfeed, but I've had difficulties because I've had a breast reduction. And I remember having a lot of resistance, a lot of resistance from the midwife, because she had said, I said, I'm just going to try and extract some colostrum off the baby, because I was always told that it's valuable nutrients for the baby when the baby's first born. And they were like, that's not going to feed a child. I was like, if I can't breastfeed, I'm going to use formula. I've got formula with me. And they wouldn't let me leave because they were concerned. They said that they didn't want me to fall through the gaps because they were concerned that I wasn't ready to leave. I was like, what does that actually mean? This is my second C-section. I have a son at home, and the best way to feed a baby is to feed a baby. So it's either breast milk or formula. I've just gone through this to not feed her. And there was a lot of resistance in saying that they didn't want me to leave. And I was like, I don't want to stay in a hospital when there's a virus out there and there's people walking around in masks. No, I want to get out. Yeah, it wasn't the greatest. I haven't really thought about it until now. I haven't really had the best time. But with my daughter, there was less time spent in hospital because they wanted you in and wanted you out. And then having had a C-section, there's certain checks that you have to do. Like you have to wee a certain amount. You must not be passing any blood. And once I was done, I said, I'm ready to go. And they give you a book. When you leave the hospital, it's a red book here in the UK. And you cannot leave without that red book. It's almost like the hospital saying, this is the baby, almost like you need it for registration. And I was leaving. I was like, I'm just going to go because there's no reason why you're holding me here. I don't want to be in hospital anymore. I've passed all the physical checks. I'm okay. And you're just delaying it because you've got concerns about how I'm going to feed my second child. And they at one point refused to give me the book. And I just said, I'm calling my husband and I'm leaving. Yeah. there's lots of conversations around racial bias within the NHS. As much as I love it, I have had firsthand with my first son experiencing racial bias with my midwife, and there were other examples of because of that, and it just made me feel very unseen and unheard of what I was talking about previously with this midwife. So it just felt like I'd seen this particular midwife talk to other women who had vaginal births, and this was their first C-section, and they had left the ward, no questions asked. And this was my second C-section, and she was very not wanting to let me go. It wasn't until I made a mark and said, look, I'm done. My daughter's healthy. And also as well, her birthmark was becoming more and more present in that time. And I was concerned with what it was. And they just said that it was bruising.
Wow. And she still has it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's basically, at the moment, there's no real understanding about why it happens. There is a pattern whereby it's children that are premature. Apparently it occurs when the placenta is being formed, and it's described as an infantile hemangioma. So basically they're born with it, but not necessarily with the raised redness of the vessels, but and because my children are of mixed heritage, my daughter's very fair, so it almost looks like a leaf, the outline of a leaf. And over between 6 months, 1 to 6 months, it accelerates, it grows, and then after 6 months it starts naturally involuting. But you can intercept it with medication. But because of the pandemic, and because going to my doctors, and because like my GPs, they're not specialists in it. They're not specialists in it at all. They're like, oh, it will disappear after 3 years. Don't worry about it. And actually, it's not going to disappear in 3 years. And I'm now having laser treatment at Great Ormond Street for my daughter. But because of the pandemic, this was not seen as a priority.
Yeah.
And even though I'd done my research on it, no, again, wasn't being listened to. I finally got the referral, but because the birthmark speeds up between 1 and 6 months, anything after that, I think taking medication is pointless.
How many days in the hospital were you when you wanted to leave?
I think it was only a day, but they wanted me to stay 2 days. They wanted me to stay for 2 days. But the protocol had changed because of the pandemic.
Right. Everything changed.
Yeah, but I think I remember somebody saying to me once back in the day, like many years ago, you stayed in hospital, a nurse would show you how to breastfeed, they'd monitor you and what have you. But that's since changed, but like pandemic in and out. That's why I knew that I was mentally, I wanted to be with my son. Mentally, we weren't getting answers of that about it being about coronavirus, about how it was being contracted. No one really knew. It was just like we just heard about figures. And I think that's really important as well during that period. We just had a baby, I'd just given birth, and all you heard about on the news was fatalities. And that in itself was just, I had to try and switch off.
A lot of fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And how was your recovery?
So with my son, I just felt that like I was in autopilot because we needed to get the house done. And I was sofa surfing with a newborn baby. And I felt under a lot of pressure. Hey, I'm pregnant again. With my daughter, I think I probably started exercising. I waited the 6 weeks, the recommendation before you start exercising after a C-section here. But I bought an exercise bike. Everybody was getting exercise equipment, turning their front room into a gym because no one could go to the gyms. But I was like, I need to lose this baby weight. I need to keep strong because people are sick and I don't want to get sick. So how am I going to get fit? And it was a real struggle. And I really threw myself into trying to be a creator online. So I feel that postpartum period, I didn't have it because 6 weeks, okay, back to normal. I'm back to lifting my son up and down because my husband was working here in the loft because he was still able to work from home. But also I was having to like 2 children under 2 and no support, because when I found out I was pregnant, friends or my husband's mum was like, don't worry, we'll come down. And I was like, okay, so that's a bit of a relief, having 2 babies under 2, and then lockdown hit and no one was coming. So I didn't feel like I've heard stories of women that just, it's like trying to honor their body during this period, taking it slow. I just don't feel like I actually was able to achieve that.
And mentally, how were you?
Yeah, I think it was very foggy.
Yeah.
It was very foggy because all around me, there was just like every time you turned on the news, there was something bad that was going on. There was a shortage in the UK of toilet roll, of everything, toilet roll. My friends had to send me formula milk from up north because you couldn't buy any milk. So there was that real fear of, oh my God, we can't, like, how am I going to feed baby? My boobs aren't working. What am I going to do? It was in heightened. And so I was not really sleeping. Baby wasn't really sleeping. My daughter, both children have tongue tie or had tongue tie. Typically, when my son was born, it was done 2 days afterwards. With my daughter, it was like all the hospitals are dealing with the pandemic, so we're not going to have it. So it's like finding a practitioner online, doing like having somebody come to your house to like basically with a pair of scissors, they're not just a pair of scissors, to clip my daughter's tongue tie. And all of that was done at such a speed because, and there's no external help. So I was like, okay, this is fine. Yeah, everybody else must be going through something. Like the whole world is in a crisis. I'm sure I can crack on with this. And it wasn't until probably after her first birthday, still in lockdown, that I was like, actually, I need to just take a step back. I can honestly say now, with her coming up to her 3rd birthday and my son's 4th, that I'm starting to feel a lot lighter. And I feel that before, even during my son's pregnancy, and then with my daughter, certain parts of my pregnancies and postpartum, I feel that was taken away. And that is now an impact that I'm now having to manage now and regulate, because that moment's gone. It's gone, but it definitely left an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, you have quite some unique experiences.
Yeah.
To say the least. Do you have any plans to have more kids?
That's a good question. It's a really good question. If it happens, there's no planning, but I'm actually, again, I don't know my body enough. I'm trying to learn about my body. I'm going into that. Am I perimenopausal? Is this like this certain symptoms? And I went to the doctors the other day actually, and I was like, look, I've just gained a lot of weight. I'm not sleeping, but I also, it could be other like external stresses that are coming to play. And there's no real attention around that. They were just like, yeah, that no checks, no blood tests. I had to insist on blood tests. And they just like, no, you're probably at that point where you can't have kids. What, just by looking at me and just by, so I think if it happens, but one thing I'm not going to do is, this is going to sound really, it sounds like I'm going to contradict myself here, is not take on so much comments from my GPs. They're obviously, they're the experts, they're definitely the experts, but I am trying to be more in tune with my body, because it was the experts at the beginning of my journey that had not even looked at my medical history, not even put me on scales, who said, your ethnicity at your age, the rates aren't that great. And at your age, that's what they said on me presenting myself to them and saying, I want to be pregnant. And I took that on board. And I think that negativity doesn't help to my journey and won't help to anybody else's journey. I just had to have a little bit of faith in me. And that's when I left my job and got my dog. And then we fell pregnant. But no help to the doctor that said, I'm going to start you on this IVF journey before your 40th birthday. Because my borough, once you're 40, it's a big no. And he hadn't even done that. And it was July. And I think I met him in February and he'd left the practice. So there's, to say that not all doctors care is, that's, I'm not going to say that. But the people that the GPs that I've been in touch with haven't, I didn't feel very supported by them. So
Yeah.
the one thing I'm not going to do is go to the doctors and say, look, I'm thinking about having a baby. If it happens, and I just
Hmm.
have to have a little bit of faith in my body and know that it's done it a couple of times and maybe it could happen again.
Yeah. What was your biggest challenge being pregnant in your 40s? You've had a few.
I've had a few, but one was, and it's funny because I try not to, I live by the notion by, I don't care what you've got to say. It's my life. I'll do what I want to do. But I think I was extremely, very vulnerable. Like I was experiencing things that I hadn't done before and I felt at a loss. But one thing was people and their comments.
Mhm.
Typically, before I was pregnant, I'd probably give them two fingers and tell them to get lost. But yeah, I was on a bus. I was heavily pregnant with my daughter, and I was beside the pram with my son, and somebody came over to me and said, "Oh my goodness, isn't your grandson such a looker?" I was huge. I was
Mm.
huge. And
Mhm.
it really is, and it really got to me. It really got to me because I was like thinking to myself, and this is why I know that my pregnancy brain is not in line with the way that I would usually feel. I was like, oh my goodness, what I'm going to be an old mum, and this could happen, and I'm not going to live as long, and all the rest of it. And then having people tell me, and that wasn't the first time. That wasn't the first time. In fact, it happened the other day. I opened the door, and the postman, who I see regularly, my two children, and they're at the door saying, "Mummy, mummy," and he's
Mm.
like, "Oh my goodness, your grandchildren are so lovely." I'm like, they just said mum. They just said mum, not grandmum. They said mum. These are my kids,
Gosh.
and that kind of it's not really it has me thinking. It has me thinking, oh my god, I've left it too late to have children, XYZ. But then I have to just bring it my feet back down to the ground and just be in the moment and remember anything can happen to anybody at any time. And I was married to somebody that I thought I knew. Thought, we dated for a long time, we got married, and it wasn't the right time for me to have a baby. If we had a child, it wasn't going to work out. We wouldn't like that marriage wasn't going to work out. Then fast forward to I don't know, the gap was maybe 10 years when I met my husband, Cookie. That was the right time. Now, and the podcast that I brought out, it's called Sooner or Later, and it's basically to dismantle that narrative that get the job, meet the guy, have the baby, like at 25. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Like I did that. I played by those rules, met the guy, didn't want to have a kid. My life went crazy. I lost my mum many years ago. And that for me is if I had a child with my ex-husband, it wasn't going to work. And yes, biology comes into it, but I think a lot of it is knowing that your time is the right time, not anybody else's. There are other factors at play, but the moment you absorb everybody else's insecurities, that's when it starts crushing you. You have to
Right.
believe that it's in your time and
Yeah.
not anybody else's time. And people say to me, oh, but you're going to be like an old mum. My mum was 60, she's passed away. Like she's not here.
Right.
I know people that have their mums up until, look at the Queen and the now King. Like he was in his 90s, he was 70 odd. I've chosen to have a child at this age because it was the right time. I wasn't ready. And that's the thing, you have to do it in your time because I think if I did have a child with my ex-husband, I wasn't ready in my mind.
Yeah.
And that's what I live by, whether it's family, careers, or what have you. Yeah, sure, I'm older. And sure, there is that feeling of thinking, okay, so I'm like 44 now and I've got toddlers. And am I going to see this or that? But no one is guaranteed tomorrow. No one. And yeah, if I decided that in 5 years' time and I'm still able to, then yeah, and I want to have kids, I'm having kids. Like
Yeah.
the big thing at the moment is I think it's like they're like, oh yeah, Robert De Niro, he's had his seventh kid and he's at 79. Or let people live their lives. Just because it's not on your scale, doesn't matter. He's having a kid. Leave him
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah. I
But
love
also,
those because those are powerful statements, and borrowing other people's statements are really disempowering.
yeah, and also as well, you don't know and specifically to mum, to your audience, you don't know what that person's gone through. Yep. Right? You don't know. Like, everybody was just like, you're leaving it a bit late. You don't know that I was like trying. You don't know that like mentally I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
So don't make that assumption, but people do it. And maybe I was guilty of mentioning to a friend, like before I had children, and you got married, now you can have babies. So you don't know what someone's going through. So how about you just close your mouth and move on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've gone around about the houses, but yeah, I will. Yeah, if it happens, if I'm blessed, if it happens, like I'll fully embrace it. But it's not something on my cards, if I'm honest.
Okay. Anything you'd recommend that would help prepare someone for pregnancy and birth?
Quite similar to what I was saying earlier. Like everybody's experience is very different. I was very set on my pregnancy was going to be like this and giving birth was going to be like that. And there was an air of disappointment. Very like momentarily, I was like, "But this is what have I done? My body's not doing it as it should do." Because I read on Google page whatever, is perhaps limit yourself and what you're exposing yourself to. We live in a world whereby we consume a lot of information, and I guess if you're looking to have children, you may be following people, reaching out to people. Everybody's situation is different. I wish I hadn't thought that I was Dr. Google and I would find something would happen and I would go and research it, and then I would end up like spiraling. I would say condense where you're getting your information from. Keep your communities tight. So I know that lots of your listeners, they tune in every week and you would have researched your guests and what have you. Like hone in on those and stay with those, because there's a lot of information out there and not all information is good for you. Finding your community, I think, to get information is vital.
I love that. What advice would you give yourself when you were pregnant if you could go back?
If I could go back, it's been a bit of a rough but good journey, because I feel that has shaped my character now. I don't know if I would change. I think I would probably say to enjoy it more and not be in fear. Like it goes back to what I just said, anything can happen at any time to anyone, to pregnancies. And yeah, try and be in the moment. Try be more in the moment and more in touch with yourself. One of the things that I used to do was to try and ground myself, was just to walk outside on grass, so I could actually like bring myself down. It's going to be okay. You're okay. You know, we can deal with things, and just find some kind of practice to yourself, something that you can do quietly, because lots of people are going to give you their opinions, doctors, friends, parents. Making time to focus on yourself. Enjoy it, I would say for me, to enjoy it more and to give myself more attention.
Is there anything else you want to add about your pregnancy or birth?
No, I think I covered quite a lot of it. Yeah, I think if I was to give a message, would be my time, the thing I said about the time factor, not listening to other people's negative comments, because I heard a lot of it.
Yeah.
I heard a lot of it, like, why are you leaving it so late? And then from the doctors as well, trying to, I know it's very difficult because society thinks that they seem to reward the young and like we're obsessed with youth. But I wouldn't change having my children at this age. I think I was a bit of an late 20s, early 30s. It wasn't the right time. So yeah, like the right time is your time and not by anybody else's time.
I love that. Where can our listeners find you on the internet?
I'm here, there, and everywhere, but mainly on Instagram. So that is at Sophia R. Cook, SophiaRcook on Instagram, and on my podcast, which is called Sooner or Later, the Sophia Cook Podcast.
Anything else?
No, just thank you so much for allowing me to share my story to your community. And yeah, my DMs are always open. It was a very unique, very different like pregnancies because of the global pandemic. But yeah, I'm always open to further conversations.
Great. Sophia, thank you so much for sharing your story on the show.
Thank you. Thanks, Jamie.